Okay, Nun Aleph Amid Aleph. Hopefully we'll get as far as we need to. If not, we'll have to do extra tomorrow. Tana Rabbanan. Ezehu Meish Sheyesh Lo Rekev. So there's something called a mace. This is going to sound a little bit of an interesting and depressing discussion, but as I said in the first half, Yomi, it's just fascinating that Chazal are able to discuss all of these issues and to really have a handle, and these discussions really are much more broad-based than just this specific conversation. Tana Rabbanan. Ezehu Meish Sheyesh Lo Rekev. You have a mace, you have a corpse. When the corpse starts to decompose, so it becomes a aizel, which is like when it still has some moisture, like gel-like, and then when it finally loses all of its moisture, it's called a tarvas rekev, the corpse dust. And we're going to discuss today the corpse dust. What's the status of the corpse dust? And we're going to discuss it in terms of tumah, specifically for a Nazir. So, ezu mesh sheyesh lo rekev, which is a mace that has rekev. We're going to discuss rekev. So just keep that word, and we're going to talk about rekev. Rekev is corpse dust. So which one has rekev? And when we say it has rekev, that means it has rekev that's going to be metame a Nazir. Mesh nikbar aron ba'aron shel shayish o al gabe ritzba shel avanim zehu mesh sheyesh lo rekev nikvar b'kisuso ba'aron shel eitz o al gabe ritzba shel avenim. So in order to have rekev, you need to have a body that decomposes by itself. It can't be mixed with anything else. So if you have rekev, if you have a mace that's buried in a coffin of marble or on a floor of avanim, so there's nothing from the marble, nothing from the avanim mixing in with the rekev, and therefore it's considered to be rekev. But if it's nikbar bikisusa, like we do nowadays, so for instance nowadays you would never have rekev because it's buried on the ground, it's buried in the earth, and it's buried with clothing on, with the tachrich and etc. So if it's buried biksuso or in a wooden coffin like we do, or on a floor with bricks, so when it goes out and decomposes, it's not only going to be the body decomposing, it's going to be the bricks, the coffin, the clothing as well, and therefore the resulting pile of dust is actually not going to be considered to be rekev. Again, in terms of whether it's metame a kohen or not, that's a separate discussion. But is it considered to be rekev, to be metame a nazir, if it touches a nazir? So then that's the question. Says the Gemara, Amar Ula, Ein rekev el haba min abasar min agidim min atzamos. Similarly, it's only rekev if it's a combination of basar, gidim, and atzamos. It has to have flesh, sinews, and bones. If it's just basar from a dead person, if you take basar and it decomposes, that will not be rekev. And again, to be rekev, it needs to be a ladle full worth of dust. Says the Gemara, it has to be basar, gidim, and atzamas. Esri Rabbi Leula rekev haba min habasar tar. You see the rekev that comes from basar is tahor. Ha mina etzem tamei. That implies that if it's from the etzem, it's tamei. V'afa gav deleka basar. That if it's just basar, it's tahor. But if it's just etzem, it's tamei. And you just tell me it needs to be basar, gidim, and atzamos. Says the Gemara, no, emahachi. That's not how you read it. Rekev haba min habasar. If you have rekev that's from basar, then it's tahor achiyesh etzem bebasar. It's tahor until it has etzem. But once you have etzem and basar, then it's going to be tamei, the rekev. I haleka gidim, there's no gidim. Says no. Yafshar lebasar letzamas below gidim. Once you have basar and atzamos, once you have flesh and bones, it's impossible that you wouldn't have gidim, and therefore once you have the two of them, you have gidim as well, and that is considered to be rekev. Again, when I say rekev, that means it's rekev and it's matame. Amar Shmuel Barada Baba Amar Yochanan. Nasu Gilgalin Zelazet. Now Gilgalin means that the dust mix and it's not metame. So not only can it not mix with the decaying wood or the decaying bricks or the clothing from the person, it needs to be just the dust, the rekev of this person. So too, it can't be two people mixed together. So if you bury, somebody asked me, like a mass grave in the Holocaust, so if you have two people or three people or 100 people decomposing together, so the resulting dust is not considered to be rekev. It needs to be one specific person and only one person. Masir Rav Nasan
also can't be wearing clothing.
Right, again, so if the person, assuming that the person was naked and not wearing clothing and they're piled on top of each other, or just two people buried next to each other, the resulting thing would not be considered to be rekev. Matzah Rav Nasan, rekev abami beis mesim tamei. But you see that rekev that comes from two mesim is tamei. Amarava shekavru zeb ifnei atzmo v'zeb ifnei atzmo v'herkivu, and they decayed v'amdu al melo tarvad rekev. There's a difference between burying two people together and having the original dust, and taking one person's dust and the other person's dust and mixing them together. If they decay separately and you get half a handful from this one and half a handful from this one and you mix it together to make one handful, which is the minimum amount to be metame, then it can be metame. But if they decay together, so then that's not going to be considered rekev. Amar Rabba bar Rav Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Gaza se'aro v'kivro ivo naselo gilgalim. So too, if you bury a person usually with hair, so if you bury a person with hair and they're buried, so then that becomes part of the body, and when that decomposes, so that's considered to be rekev, the resulting thing. But what happens if you cut off the hair and you bury the hair? So is the hair that's cut off, is that considered to be part of the person still? Or is it considered to be like an outside thing, like you had brick or you had an eitz or you had clothing, and it's going to disqualify the pile? It's not hasam, kolsha b'meis tamei chutz min hashinayim v'aser v'tzvarim. So the Gemara says that if you gaza sarvakavro, naselo gilgalim. So if you cut off the hair and you bury it, it's gilgalin, and it's going to, quote unquote, ruin the mixture. It's not hasam. You have another Mishnah. Any part of a mace is tamei. That means if you touch a mace, it's tamei, or seemingly even if you touch a limb of the mace that separates, you're going to be tamei. Chutz min hashinayim v'aser v'tziporin. Now, when they're connected, uvishas chiburan kulan tamein. If you touch just the hair of a dead person, so you're tamei. But if you touch the hair of a dead person when the hair is no longer attached to the body, or you touch the shinayim of the dead person when it's no longer attached to the body, or you touch the siporin, the nails of a dead person when it's no longer attached to the body, so therefore those things are not going to transmit tumah. Says the Gemara, "By Chizkiya, Sa'ara omed legaleach tziporna omed ligzaz mai." So now you have a person who passes away. So let's say the hair is part of them. So we just said if the hair is on them, so if you touch the hair, you're tamei. Let's say back in the day, nowadays we all get haircuts at different times. It seems like back in the day there was a certain length that if your hair got, or if your nails got to a certain length, it was known as the time to get a haircut, or the time to cut your nails. Again, nowadays we bite our nails, our hair grows different lengths. But it seems like back then there was like a standard length where nobody grows their hair longer than this. So let's say the person who passes away, and their hair is longer than the standard amount. So what does that mean? That hair is omed ligazes. That hair is set to be cut off. It's not actually cut off, but it should be cut off. The nails should have been cut off before the person died. So do we consider that to be part of the person still, or since it's omed ligazes, it's as if it's cut off? Mi amrina kol omed ligazes kegazuz dami. Since it should have been cut off, it's considered like it's cut off. And now when you bury the person, now, well, first of all, if you would touch, for our case, if you would touch the nail now, so if it's considered to be kegazuz dami, then you're not going to become tamei. Or dilma hashna miyaha mechubaran, or lamaisa, now it should have been cut off, but it's still connected, and if you touch the hair or the nails, so you're going to go ahead and become tamei. Says the Gemara, "V'nifshole midi Rabbi bar bar Chana." We should learn it from Rabbi bar Chana. We should answer the question. Why? Because Rabbi bar Chana said on top that if you cut the hair and you bury it, then it's naselo gilgal in time. Mishum de gazas halo gazas lo. If you didn't cut the hair, so then lamaisa, it's not going to be gilgalim. And seemingly, if you didn't cut the hair, no matter how long it is, you're going to be tamei by touching it. Says the Gemara, no, hachi kamar gazas harei ze gilgalim. He's talking about if you cut it off, it's considered to be a gilgalim and it ruins the mixture. Lo gazes mi bayale, but you can't learn anything from that. What would be if it's omed li gazes? Yes, he says that if it's still on the head, so then lamaisa, it's considered part of the person, and it's considered to be rekev. And if it's off and you bury it together, then it's not rekev. It ruins the mixture. But that doesn't answer our question about what happens if the person is omed li gazes or omed to cut their hair. Is that considered to be part of them or not in terms of issues of tumah? Says the Gemara, I don't know. There's a lot of Gemaras that end here, even though it doesn't say teku. A lot of Gemaras here end without having an answer. Next case. Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rekev Abba Mina Akev Mahu. If you have Rekev that comes from a heel, what's the din of the Rekev? Well, why would that be different? Well, we know that a heel is a lot of dead skin. So is the heel, which is dead skin, it's already dead skin while you're alive, is that considered to be rekev? Will that be regular dust? Or do we consider it like the rest of the body, and even though it's dead skin while you're alive, lamaisa, it's like the rest of the body? So says the Gemara, well, first of all, what's the difference? Ki gamrinan rekev hacha mikule meisav al da'asimin akev lo. Does it exclude from the heel? Or dilma lo shna, or it includes even the heel? Says the Gemara, tashma, ditani Rav Nasan b'Rabbi Yoshia, rekev haba mishnei mason tame. We see that rekev that comes from two different mason, which we said is when they're not together. When they're two different mason, half from here and half from here is tamei. So the Gemara at this point is assuming that maybe if it comes from the akev, not just if it's just from the akev, if it's mixed in with other parts of the body, then maybe that'll disqualify, quote unquote, the rest of the dust from being rekev. So if you're telling me that ba min ha'akev is love, you're telling me that from the heel is not considered to be rekev. Zil hacha dilma derech akev ka'asi v'hacha dilma derech akev ka'asi. Now think about it. When you have two different bodies here, and you take half a handful from this one and half a handful from this one, you mix them together to get one handful. Says the Gemara, if you want to suggest that from the heel is not going to be considered to be regular dust, regular ash, so then how can you say that when you have one handful exactly? Again, if you have more than one handful, no need to talk about, because there's enough from other parts of the body. But if you have exactly one handful, chances are, and I would even say it's interesting, because I would have thought the Gemara could have said this from one specific body even, but the Gemara uses the example of two different bodies, but maybe even one body, if you have exactly one handful, So now the question is, maybe min ha'akev, you don't know. Maybe if parts of the akev, it must be that we consider the akev to also count, because if it didn't count, we have to be choshesh again. Because what are we doing here? We're not just saying, oh, it's rekev. We're saying that if a Nazir touches it, he's going to have to get malchus. If we're going to give him malchus min haTorah, we have to be sure that this status of this thing is actually rekev. So we're going to take exactly half and half and make exactly one, and say if he touches the one, the minimum amount he's going to get malchus. So it must be that whatever part of it, even if there's a little bit of heel in there, we're including the heel like everything else. That's what the Gemara says. That's what the Gemara wants to prove. Says the Gemara, you're right. The Gemara says, I agree. If you're talking about a whole body, or you're talking about a pile from two different bodies, and the akev is mixed in, I agree that it's, I don't know if the Gemara says batel, it's not batel, but I agree that that's going to be considered part of the thing, and that's regular rekev. The Gemara says the question that we're asking is if you have heel dust just by itself, if for whatever reason you have just the heel and you have the dust just from the heel, is that considered to be rekev or not? That's what the Gemara says. Take you, I don't know, and you can't bring any proofs from Reb Nassan and Rabbi Oshia. Right, 10 more minutes. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, Ubar b'me'eisha have gilgalim olo. If you have a fetus inside of a woman when she passes away, so is that considered to be part of her or not? If it's not part of her, then it's like eitz, and then therefore when she decomposes, so she's not going to become rekev. But if it's not part of her, then she's not going to become rekev. If it's part of her, then she'll become rekev. It's like any other part of her body. Kevan de amar mar ubar yerech imo, the famous idea, yerech imo, that the ubar is like the thigh of the mother, it's considered part of her. Hilkach gufahu v'lo have gilgalin. It's part of her body, and therefore it's not gilgalin. It's not going to ruin it, and it'll be rekev. O dilma kevan de sofolat, say since it should have come out, even though it didn't come out. Mifrash parish mina. It's considered like an outside thing, and therefore when she decomposes, it's not going to be rekev. V'imtim selomar ubar desofolat says mifrash parish mina. And if you say that in fact it's not considered to be part of her, and therefore it ruins the decomposition and it doesn't become rekev, shichva zera b'me'eisha mau. Then let's say she dies and she has shichva zera. She had relations within the last 72 hours, because after that it's not viable. So let's say she has shichva zera in her. Is that also going to ruin it, and then she's not going to become rekev? Says the Gemara, mi amrinan kevan delo itzad gigufa dami, since it didn't form into an embryo, the shechvat zera, so it's like part of her body. O dilma kevan de me alma kasilo, or maybe because it's from the outside, it's not considered to be part of her body, and it's going to ruin the decomposition and not make it into rekev. Says the Gemara, it doesn't say it, but the Gemara doesn't answer that kasha. Bar Rav Papa, pir shamahu. What about excrement? A lot of times there's excrement, not just outside of the body that when a person passes away, but inside the body. Does that consider to be that when it goes out, it's going to stop a person from becoming rekev? Kevan delo mekayme b'delo achla chiyusa, who since you can't live without eating, it's considered part of you. Or dilma hanami me'amasi. All the maisa, it's something that's from the outside the body. Now it's inside your body, but it's from outside, and therefore you go ahead and you decompose, so you're not rekev. The Gemara is going to ask in just a minute if that's true. You're never going to have a body that's rekev, because everybody's going to have some type of excrement inside of them when they pass away. Says the Gemara, similarly, Bay Rav Acha, Breda Rav Ika, O Romahu. What about skin, not flesh? Right, when they went ahead and they took Rabbi Akiva, I don't know if it was just I'm not clear if it's the skin or the flesh, but let's say you take the skin off. Flesh is definitely matame. It's a question whether skin by itself, without the flesh underneath it, whether that's matame. So let's say you have just the skin and it decomposes. What happens if you have the saliva or you have the mucus? Is that considered to be, if just that part, well, I don't know if just that part, or let's say that part decomposes, is that considered to be rekev or not? If you're going to consider excrement, and you're going to consider saliva, and you're going to consider mucus, and you're going to consider skin to basically go ahead and ruin the rekev, so then you're never going to have rekev, because everybody that passes away is going to have those parts, at least part of it. Says the Gemara, and it's unclear to me what the answer of the Gemara is here. Ashke made dekalim, where they fed him a certain type of palm water which gets rid of saliva and mucus before he died. Then they went ahead, and what did they do? Again, this is not literal. V'sachi nasha. Then they went ahead and they put cream on him to get rid of all of his hair. V'shalku b'mei Tiveria. Then they cooked him alive in the Mei Tiveria, in the hot springs of Tiveria. So therefore, he had no mucus, he had no skin, he had none of this stuff, he had no saliva. Then the question becomes, does he become rekev or not? Now, there's two ways to understand this Gemara. I understood the Gemara is basically saying that it's impossible, and the Gemara says, okay, because then there's no discussion of rekev. So somebody in the first year wanted to say, okay, Lamaisi, what the Gemara here is telling you is that it's impossible to have any rekev, because it's impossible you're ever going to have a case like this. I thought maybe the Gemara is telling you, no, everybody's rekev, and obviously when these are parts of the body, because you're never going to do this, when these are parts of the body, so then the body is considered to be rekev, it's going to decompose. The question would just become, which the Gemara leaves hanging, is let's say you had saliva, I don't know the Metzias how this works scientifically, let's say you had saliva from a person and then just the saliva decomposes, or you have mucus of a person and just the mucus decomposes, or you have skin, which is more common maybe, and just the skin decomposes, then the Gemara leaves it as a unanswered question whether that can be considered rekev if you get a handful of it. But it doesn't seem to me, the way I'm learning the Gemara is that the Gemara is basically saying, you're right, there is no such case, and the fact that we're having this discussion of rekev in the first place seems to say that these things are not going to ruin the pile, and even though these are part of a regular person who passes away, Lamaisa, we're talking about rekev, so we're saying that a regular person who decomposes has rekev. Outside factors like wood, outside factors like maybe an ubar, outside factors, so like that, then we have a discussion, maybe that's more of a discussion. But based on the Gemara here, again, one way to learn it would be that no, in a chanami, a regular thing, that if you pass away with hair, again, is separated from you, that's a question. Hair, mucus, saliva, things like that, you die, so that's going to be like every other person, excrement, and that person can still become rekev. That's how I understood this Gemara. But again, one can learn that the Gemara is basically rejecting the idea of rekev and saying, Ein Chanami. Unless you do this, which nobody's going to do, it's impossible, you never have rekev. But it doesn't sit well with me because the Gemara spends so much time talking about rekev, and it doesn't end the conversation here. It continues talking about rekev. So it's hard for me to hear from this Gemara that the maskana of the Gemara is that rekev just doesn't ever apply. Rabbi. What?
It's only one opinion anyway, no?
Again. Right, but that was again two different ways to learn the Gemara. Rabbi, nakdinan meisha tichnu ein larekev. This is not exactly cremation, but let's say you take a mace, or at least part of a mace, and you grind it up. So ein lo rekev. When that decomposes, it doesn't become rekev. Let's say you grind it up, but then you wait and it decomposes by itself. Now, is that resulting decomposition of the thing that you ground up? Is that considered to be rekev? Lemaisa, do we say you just need basar gidim and atzamos, and this has basar gidim and atzamos, and therefore it's rekev? Or do you need, in order to have rekev, do you need to have the basar and the gidim and the atzamos go ahead and decay naturally before being ground up? Says the Gemara, Teishku tishbi yitaris kushos ubayos. Tani ula bar chanina. Says ula bar chanina. Meis shachasar. If you have a mace who's missing a limb, Ein lo rekev. So if you have a mace that's missing a limb and then they decompose, there is no rekev. Velo tefusa. That's a separate halacha that when you exhume a body in order to rebury it, you need to take some of the ground that it's buried with you. So lemaisa, if it's a mace shechasar, if it's a mace that's missing a limb, you don't have the requirement of taking some of the earth with you. That's a halacha losh misinai seemingly. Velo shchunas kfaros. There's different ways to understand this, but this seemingly is saying that if you have three bodies next to each other, three Jewish bodies next to each other, so then it becomes a Jewish cemetery, quote unquote, and you have to be choshesh for tumah everywhere. If you have one of those bodies as being a mace that's chaser, that's missing a limb, then you don't yet have three. You don't yet have the zimun, and it's not yet a Jewish cemetery. Meisvei, says the Gemara, lo yimamart b'meish yesh lo rov v'roa v'rova malei tarvad rekev tomar b'chai she'ein lo rov v'lo rov v'lo malei tarvad rekev. What the Brisa here is doing is the Brisa is basically comparing a mace to a live person. It's saying you have a kazayis of flesh from a mace, that's matame. Kazayis of flesh. If I go over to you and take a bite out of you, somebody asked me this week, a random question in shul, if a person is kosher or not. So if I take a bite out of a person, it doesn't sound lemaisa nowadays, but the question is when you have to eat. So for a pikuach nefesh, it wouldn't be necessarily. But let's say stam, let's say a person passes away, so we give kavod mace. The question is, can you eat a person? So that's an interesting question. So, but you have a mace here. So if you take a piece of a mace, so that's matame. Kazayis of a flesh from a mace is matame. Says the Gemara here, kazayis of flesh from a live person is not matame. And therefore, just like the bones and the corpse of a mace becomes rekev, the corpse, or not the corpse, the if you take a part of a live person and that decomposes, so then that does not become rekev. So just like a flesh of a mace is matame, so too the flesh of a mace becomes rekev, and so too the flesh of a chai person on the other thing is not matame, and therefore the flesh of a chai person, even if it decomposes while he's still alive, that will not become rekev. Hechidami, what's the case? The arkiv chad aver. If you tell me now that the case is where the dust of the live person is one limb, and therefore one limb does not become rekev, what does that imply? That implies that one limb by a mace can become rekev. You just told me though that if a mace that's even missing one limb doesn't become rekev. So which one is it? Says the Gemara, no. Miketani ha-mace. Does the Gemara say that it's exactly comparing and contrasting a mace to a chai? No. Ha-kamash, what it's teaching us, shum mace yesh lo rekev. What it's teaching us is that only a complete mace is subject to rekev. It means you have a person who passes away without part of their body, with a limb missing or something, that person cannot become rekev. Only a full mace can become rekev. And on the other extreme, shum chai ein lo rekev. Even the smallest part of a chai cannot be rekev. So it's two different extremes. A mace needs to have the entire body to become rekev, and a chai, even if there's only even if you have the entire body, no chai is subject to rekev. Boy Rava, and therefore that's why he says meisha chaser, if it's missing even a limb, ein lo rekev. We'll finish with this. Boy Rava. Here give kishahu chai v'chaser v'meis mao. So let's say we take off of your body some flesh. We said that does not become rekev. Now all of a sudden you go ahead and you die, and now so now the question is, can that flesh, if that flesh was from a dead person and it decomposes, now it can become rekev. But if we took the flesh off of you while you were alive, so if it decomposes while you're alive, it doesn't become rekev. Let's say now it decomposes after you die, but it was taken off of you while you were alive. What's the din? Ki gemiri rekev di irkav kishehu meis. It's only when it's irkav kishehu meis. O dilma hashta mia hameis. Maybe over here, lemaisa, you're dead now, and it can turn into rekev. Says the Gemara, the same proof. Tashma lo mart b'meisha yishlo rov v'rova v'malei tarvad rekev tomar b'chai. Time mishum chai ha meis yesh lo rekev. So the Gemara says miketani ha meis ha kamash malan mishum meis yesh lo rekev shum chai ein lo rekev. So the Gemara answers that what the Mishnah says that only a complete maid is subject to rekev, but no chai is subject to rekev. The problem that I have with this Gemara is it doesn't seem to be answering the question. What was the question? The question was here give kishahu chai v'chazer meis mao. Actually, the Gemara's question seems to be that I took off a piece of your flesh. It was hirkiv while you're alive, so that's not going to go ahead and become rekev. Now you die, does that become rekev? It sounds like to me the Gemara is asking a question that the Gemara is not asking the question if I take off a piece of your flesh and then it becomes rekev. It sounds like the Gemara might even tell you that if I take off a piece of a live person's flesh and it only starts to decompose after he dies, so then eina chanami, it'll be what's the name, but it'll be rekev. The chance of that happening are very slim, because as soon as you take off a piece of flesh, it'll start to decompose right away. But the shaila is, if I take off a piece of your flesh and then it decomposes, so now you have this pile of dust which is not rekev because you're still alive. Now you die, does that pile become rekev? Says the Gemara, based on this Mishnah, that what? Only a complete mace is subject to rekev, and no chai is subject to rekev. But the Gemara is not answering the kasha. The Gemara is going to leave it, because that's not the kasha. The kasha was, in this specific case, where we took it off and then you died, what's the halacha with this stuff? The Gemara brings this case, no, a mace and only a full mace has rekev, and a chai person doesn't have rekev even a little bit. That doesn't answer my kasha. So the Gemara doesn't seem to answer the kasha. That's how I understood this. Let's just end the DAF. 1 second. Let's just end the DAF. Boy Rava nimala shechasra mahu. We'll end with this. We'll answer the question tomorrow. We know that there's a din that you have to eat a kezayis of a bug in order to be chayiv. But there's also a din that if you eat a berry, if you eat a whole bug, even if it's less than a kezayis, it's going to be a problem. If you lived in New York City like I did before this, so there was a whole thing with the bugs in the water in New York City. There's a question why you have to be worried. There are some who say you don't have to be worried because they're microscopic. I put a filter on my thing, as all kosher establishments needed to do, because they were choshesh. Many rabbanim were choshesh for even the tiniest bugs. They're called cocoa pods, not the cereal. Cocoa pods, like the little. They were like little bugs, and they're still in the New York City water. New York City is one of the best waters in the country, the cleanest waters. But they had this cocoa pods. Okay, everything has a but, so they have these little cocoa pods. So the question is, those cocoa pods, even though they're not a kazais, they're even microscopic. But even if they were bigger than a microscopic bug, but if it's less than a kazais, so lamaisa, what's the problem? The problem is that there's another halacha that if it's a full bug, you can't eat it even less than a kazais. So the question is, let's say you have a full bug, but it's missing a limb. So you have a full bug, less than a kazais, missing a limb. A full bug, missing a limb more than a kazais, or a bug more than a kazais, missing a limb, nothing to talk about, more than a kazais. But if you have a full bug, less than a kazais, missing a limb, is that considered to be a barrier or not? Says the Gemara, shiura gemirin lava hachaser, lemaisa, it's not a barrier because it's missing a limb. O barrier gemira lava ikka, or lemaisa, it's a barrier, and even though it's missing a limb, so lemaisa is going to be considered a barrier. Don't lose any sleep, but we'll give you the answer tomorrow.